Welcome to Shark Week on the channel. Today I'm here to talk about a lot of the dark fiction I've been reading recently, including 2 shark books. So yes, today I'm going to be talking about Jaws and Meg, 2 shark books that I'm reading for the absolute first time. I've never seen the movies and I can't wait to talk to you about which book will reign supreme on my channel, based off, of course, my own personal reading taste. If that sounds good, hopefully you stick around. Let's get started. First, let's talk about Meg by Steve Alten. This is a book that's actually inspired by Jaws, so I definitely read them in the wrong order to begin with, but this is a story that follows a professor who believes that the megalodon, this prehistoric sea creature that is an ancestor of the shark, possibly is still alive today. Possibly there are some living on the depths of the sea because we have not been able to explore all of the ocean in its entirety. So the story starts out in my absolute favorite way when it comes to science fiction stories, where you have this professor explaining his theory to a class of students. I love those entries into books. I love a good info dump, and this one completely pulled me in. I'm a huge fan of prehistoric life in general. Dinosaur books are my favorite. So this book actually started to remind me of Jurassic Park, which is always a great bonus, but certainly you can see the inspiration from Jaws just from popular culture. So within the story you have the professor who of course has this theory, and then as the story progresses there's a situation that ensues and they start to discover that, well, maybe Meg is actually alive, as this man believes to be true. Within the story there is some usual creature feature action, which is not my favorite aspect of stories. It really holds the story like this back from being a 5-star read, because action-based stories where it's just a big shark attacking things is not going to be something that will become an all-time favorite for me. But it was really fun, and again, for me, what worked with the story is the fact that it was so grounded in actual science. And so the book starts with a preface from the author and then actually an afterword as well, so the author had a lot to say that really talks about how the author is drawing from real possibilities, and not necessarily that Meg actually exists, but the fact is that we haven't necessarily disproven that they have died out. And I love that premise. I really felt like it made the story less campy, which is what I expect this story to be. Certainly there are some campy parts, there's some relationship drama that I did not care about, and I was definitely happy when we moved on to that and moved on to more of the shark action. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I know there are more books in the series I did not plan to continue on, but I am tempted because I had a lot of fun with this one. It was an easy ride, it's short, it's fast, it does exactly what you're expecting it to do in a really good way. So overall it was a big thumbs up for me. And then I realized I had to go back in time and read Jaws, which, like I said, I probably should have done first because of the fact that it's published well before this one and definitely was the inspiration for Meg. Alright, so after finishing and loving Meg, I then went on to Jaws by Peter Benchley, and this is one that I was nervous to pick up because I put it on my summer TBR, and a lot of people in the comments told me that I was going to hate this book. They warned me that it was very misogynistic, that it did not age well, that it was boring, it was dry. I heard it all, and I was really nervous because I definitely trust a lot of your opinions and you tend to know my tastes as well. So I went to this book with very low expectations, especially coming off the high of enjoying Meg so much. And I will say, maybe it was my super low expectations, but I actually had a pretty good time with this one. It was a little bit dry and slower, but it definitely had some exciting shark actions. It opens with a really great scene, it's really gruesome, and I like the fact that it wasn't just non-stop shark attacks, but instead there was a lot of dealing with the evilness of people and how people are motivated by money and economics. So there were those that were trying to hide the shark attacks in order to protect the tourism of the place or the town. So I liked those elements of the story, which I felt kind of added a bit more to it, made it less of a simple shark attacks people story. And otherwise, it definitely is a story of its age. Don't get me wrong, this is not a feminist story. This book does nothing for feminism, but maybe because I was expecting it to feel aged and to feel inappropriate at times, it didn't personally bother me. Not to say that it wouldn't bother other people. I get that. I totally respect that. But knowing it was of its time, and I would like to think that it would be written differently if it was written for the first time and edited today. But I kind of thought those parts were kind of cute and campy in a really eye-rolling kind of way. If anything, my biggest complaint with this book is that I did find it a little bit boring, even when the exciting shark parts were happening. There's just a lot of time out in the boat, and I wish that this one would be cut down. It is longer than Meg, and I felt like Meg was the right length, because when it comes to a creature feature, they're pretty predictable. You kind of know there's going to be a shark attack or some kind of monster attack. and you kind of want to get in and get out, and this one to me dragged out the middle a little bit more than it needed to. But overall, I had a fairly good time with it. Of the two books, you can probably tell that my favorite was still Meg, but if you haven't read the classic, if you're interested in it, especially if you love the older movie, definitely give Jaws a try. Just know that it is dated, but it's actually holds up better than I thought. And then if you enjoy something like that, if you're looking for something newer in that same vein, I would recommend going on to Meg, which was so much fun, and I highly recommend it. Next, let's talk about Frankie Grace by Cameron Roubique. This is part 2, and yes, I just reviewed part 1. Had I known the duology was going to be completed so quickly, I probably would have waited to do a full series review all in one video, but I'm coming back here again to let you know that the other part is out. I know a lot of you were interested in picking up part 1, so yes, you can binge through. This is the follow-up book, and this one is great because it is set in the 80s, but it pulls the character from the first book, who is the slasher, into the then modern day of the 1980s. So it's blending together once again the two time periods, and I think that the narrative structure of this series is really well done. The author definitely has grown in terms of their writing and prose, but really what they're trying to do is just create a fun slasher story that's going to feel very nostalgic for those of you that love the classic slasher movies of the decade, and I really enjoyed it. I will say again that my tastes have definitely shifted towards more literary horror, but for what this book is trying to do, I thought it did it very well, and my only criticism of it is just that it's not entirely to my new personal taste. But when it comes to Cameron Roubique's work, it's so nostalgic for me. I love these books when they first came out. I love the work that he does, and I think a lot of you will enjoy it too. Next, let's talk about Camp Damascus by Tingle. This is a book that I received for review from the publisher, and this is a story that follows a group of young people who go to a camp where it is meant to be a conversion therapy camp to pray away the gay. We follow a young woman who comes from a very conservative household, so think of high, strong, strict, conservative Christian evangelicals. That is her background. She is 20. She's still completing high school, which is kind of a strange aspect of the story. And she comes from really conservative beliefs. As you can expect, this book has a horror aspect to it. It's kind of everything is really turned on its side. And I like that it's a criticism of these highly toxic, dangerous religious practices that unfortunately are still happening today, I believe, which is shocking in this day and age. So I definitely love the premise of this book, but I fully admit it actually didn't work for me quite as well as I would have liked. I don't know if it's because I don't have the background in that evangelical Christian group that this is really leaning into, so it's specifically targeting those groups, which is kind of outside my wheelhouse because again, I come from more of a Catholic background. So I loved what it was doing in terms of the premise and setup. I still thought it was a good read. I believe I gave it 4 stars, but I wanted this book to be a knockout 5-star read, so I was ever so slightly disappointed when it turned out to be just a very solid one. And if you're curious, yes, this book is written by the Czech Tingle, but this book is solidly in the horror genre, and so it really doesn't lean into the erotica, and I personally wish it had gone there, but I assume the author wanted to do something more mainstream, but I would have been okay if they kind of leaned into that a little bit more. This book just felt a little bit safe and tropey in ways that I wish that it pushed the envelope a little bit more, which again would have leaned it up to closer to a 5-star read. Next, let's talk about First Position by Melanie Hamrick, and this is another book I received for review from the publisher. This one follows a ballet dancer who is very determined to move forward in their career. So right at the beginning of the book, they come up with a list of all the things they will and will not do in order to make sure that nothing gets in the way of their career and their success. So they don't want to party or get involved in relationships or anything that is going to distract them from this goal. And then as the story progresses, slowly that starts to slip away. They start to have those distractions come into their life, and you see how that affects them as they are going through their ballet school career. This is one that I picked up because I love stories that involve female athletics and dance. I have so many favorite books that involve thrillers set in ballet schools, etc. Anything in the Black Swan area is exactly up my alley, so I had to check this one out. And unfortunately, this one definitely leans more into contemporary fiction rather than thriller. It's one that's kind of a little bit blurry how it is blurbed and recommended by the marketer, so I was hoping it was going to go more thriller, but it's soft. I wanted it to be biting and cutting with twists and turns and devastation, and instead it really is just a look at someone who is trying to pursue a career and things get in the way. And it's done again in a way that is very light-handed, in a way that I wish that it had been cutting and brutal and all of these things that I love. So this book definitely had potential. I am just not the target audience for this because it didn't do the things that I was looking for. I was hoping it would be something along the lines of like Megan Abbott's books, and it's definitely not, which I don't think it's trying to be. So just know the book and know your expectations when you go into it. Next up is Bridge by Lauren Beukes. This is a speculative thriller that follows a young woman named Bridget, or Bridge, who is living in the complicated shadow of their mother, who is a very complicated woman themselves. And when their mother passes away, they discover that their mother has something in the freezer that allows them to travel through different multiverses in time. And the story goes from there. This is one that is incredibly ambitious, and that is what I love about Lauren Beukes. I've read them a few times now, and I love the fact that they tend to write thrillers that dabble into the speculative and dabble into horror and other genres and just cross the lines and kind of break the rules. Marketers really like, as far as I'm concerned, really like to put boxes around their books and say this book belongs to this audience, you should read this if you are into this kind of book. And her books, to me, kind of defy genre, and often that really bothers the audience. So I picked up this one looking for that. I was looking for something different, strange, unusual, out of the box, and I definitely got that. Unfortunately, I will fully admit that I found this book to be messy. I didn't feel like it had a very cohesive plot. I didn't really feel like it did what it was trying to do. Again, it was very ambitious, which I appreciate. I would rather an author take chances than write something safe. I will give harsher criticisms to books that are incredibly tropey, that just do the same thing over and over again, which I see all the time in thrillers. But while this book was doing something different, I don't think it did it as well as I would like. That being said, I will definitely continue to read more by this author because I think, again, they take chances, they do different things, and they're definitely one to watch. Unfortunately, this one was a miss for me, but maybe it'll work better for other people, depending on how you feel about her work. Next, let's talk about Never Let You Go by Chevy Stevens. This is a thriller that follows a woman who, right at the beginning of the story, told through flashbacks, we find out about her becoming involved with a man who turns out to be abusive. So when she's in the relationship, she has a child, she finds out that this man has another side to him, and then we follow her as she's trying to escape her marriage. And then most of the book is taking place in what would be the present day, where she has now escaped. He has gone to prison for something that he did. However, at the time of this book, at the time of this getting started, he has gotten out of prison and is now trying to contact her and then her daughter. And of course, on top of that, there are strange things that are going on. It appears like someone is breaking into their house. There are situations going on, potential harm to animals, all of those kind of things. And so we as a reader start to put some pieces together and start to wonder, has this man changed his way? He promises that he is a new man, he is different, he wants to get back into their life. Can a man who is abusive change his ways and come back to his family? I really enjoyed this one, even though from the get-go I felt this book seemed a little bit predictable, but I actually really like thrillers where they are a little bit more streamlined and you're just kind of following along through the story and you kind of know how it's going to go, and sometimes the suspense of the journey is more fun than a surprise twist. That being said, this book is a little bit more complicated than I let on, and I'm going to leave it there because there is some moving pieces and it's so much more fun to experience for yourself. And I enjoyed this one. I had mixed feelings about Chevy Stevens going into this book because I've read Still Missing and did not really enjoy that one, but I'm glad I gave this author another try because I really liked it. In terms of the representation of abuse, I appreciate that they didn't try to glorify it or make it overly entertaining. They were really honest about the situation that they got themselves in. I felt it very believable how a woman would get herself into a place like that, and from the outside, you as a reader can sympathize with her and empathize why that would happen instead of being judgmental. There are a few lines towards the end, a few sentences that I did feel were a little bit off and a little bit forgiving of the abuse in a way that I did not like. But overall, a really strong story. I was addicted to this one. I was doing a few different books at the same time, as I often do these days, but it was a time where I just needed to know how this book was going to finish, and so I had to stop and pause everything else I was reading just to finish this book, which is a really good sign. And I was reading along with a friend, and I got to a point where there was something that happened, and I had to grab my phone and say, oh my gosh, XYZ, I think this is happening, and predicting things and going along for it was just really enjoyable. I've had kind of a mediocre experience with a lot of thrillers these days. You don't see me giving gushing reviews that often, and it's just the fact, as I mentioned, that I do find this thriller genre to be really tired, really tropey, really predictable. And while this one maybe isn't reinventing the genre, I had a lot of fun with it, which is something I can't say about all the thrillers I read anymore. So overall, I really enjoyed this one. If you are interested in the topic and obviously not triggered by it, I do recommend it. Obviously the content warnings you would expect, but overall a really engaging, entertaining story. And finally, I read White Oleander by Janet Fitch. This is a piece of dark literary fiction that follows a young girl whose mother gets in trouble for a murder and goes off to prison right at the beginning of the story, and then we follow the daughter as she navigates the foster care system. This is one that worked for me on so many levels. So as I've mentioned, I've kind of been leaning more into dark literary fiction and not necessarily things that are simply classified as horror, but anything that just deals with dark stories, messed up families, all of that. I recently did a video talking about bad mothers, and this book got brought up in that, which was kind of a fun coincidence since I was going to be reading it already. I picked up this book as part of a new patron pick. So on my patron Discord, those that are top tier patrons get the opportunity once a season to nominate a book for my TBR, and then of the nominations I go and get a number randomly generated to pick out a book. And this one I was really pleased about because while it was randomly picked, I can tell that the person who nominated it definitely knows my taste, because again, it really fits with my love of complicated mothers, complicated relationships, and I don't even know if they knew it, but the fact that I'm so fascinated by, again, children that are in foster care or orphanages and all of those topics of children that are estranged from their parents. And so this book in a lot of ways hit so many of my buttons. So in terms of premise and setup, it was very much up my alley. I liked it. I will admit it was kind of slower than I would have liked. I didn't get as attached to the characters as I would have liked, but on paper this book is definitely one I should have checked out. And I had no idea it existed, or really I didn't know anything about it until it got nominated. So I really am enjoying this perk just because I find it's allowing me to kind of read a little bit out of my wheelhouse, help other people to guide my reading life a little bit more, and just add something expected to my days. So that's kind of fun. Overall, I like this one, didn't love it as much, but still totally glad that I read it. It was a lot of fun to try something different. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And please drop a comment to recommend to other commenters and myself. Tell me what is a dark fiction book that is perfect to read in the summer months. And if you want to help me out with this video here, if you want to give me a thumbs up, you can drop a comment, even if it's just an emoji of a shark, that would be great. If you're new to my channel and want to subscribe, I do read other books besides shark books. So I read horror, thrillers, science fiction, fantasy, and if you want to stick around, that would be great. Otherwise, if you want to hit that little notification bell, you can never miss a video from me. Otherwise, I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.